When it comes to a writer's actual mental health, what are the biggest misconceptions you see about that?
Almost always the biggest misconception is that nothing else matters to my writing. So, like, I can be going through a divorce. I can be going through a death of someone close to me, or someone in my household who's ill. I can be going through a cross country or cross world move, or someone I love or know could be in crisis, or the world could be in crisis. And none of that should affect my mental health. Like, my mental health does not matter to my writing is the biggest misconception that I think people have. And some of that is because we do see evidence of people being able to compartmentalize in certain areas, or like each person might have a way that they could compartmentalize. But generally speaking, I see that mental health matters so much to our capacity to write, almost to the point where, like, I just did a coaching call with somebody yesterday where we were looking back over her 2-year burnout process that she's been in. And we were like, oh, here was where I switched my medication. Here was where I started doing, this particular type of health thing. Here was where I changed this environmental part. And all of a sudden, at each level, we would see that her ability to cope and write went up significantly each time she addressed one of those things. And because we had this full 2-year look back, we were able to really identify, like, oh, there's where that happened. And oh, here's where my word count was. And here's where my mental health was. And here's how all of that shifted. And I was telling her in this retrospective, I guess, that we were doing, right? I was like, people don't understand when they're going through that, though, how much of a difference it would make to go after stability instead of going after higher word counts, because this fixing the stability is actually what will fix the word count, or fixing my health, especially if it has to do with cognitive health or biological health. Like, if I'm going through, just to name a few, menopause, if I'm going through some kind of a biological change in my hormones, pregnancy is a big one, right? If I'm going through health concerns or moves, something that will shift my environmental stability, we often try to ignore those things because we're told we should be able to compartmentalize. And instead, what I see is, we should have addressed the stability in that moment and gone after stability more aggressively, so that we could get you to a mental health place where you were able to get your creativity back. Because creativity on Maslow's hierarchy is a higher level function. And we often don't think about the importance of what it means that Maslow's hierarchy has to be handled one step at a time. Like, you have to handle your physiological needs first and your biological needs first before you can access those higher levels of function.
It's funny you should mention stuff about health and environmental factors. I don't know if you've seen over there, we've had some pretty ridiculous weather over here in the UK. We've had droughts, we've had floods, we've had 40-degree weather with no air conditioning. I've barely written for like the past 6 weeks. I've barely even
Yep.
opened anything because 40 degrees.
Yeah, with no AC. I don't know
It's
how y'all
horrible.
are doing it.
Luckily, it was only 2 days. I mean, it was two
Oh,
days of
okay.
hell. But then the weather kind of kept sticking at around like the mid 30s. And I was quite severely dehydrated in that time as well. So you can imagine what
Yep.
that did to my ability to think and
Right.
move.
Dehydration affects our brain on such a huge level. And, like, yeah, and people just don't think about stuff like that. Yeah.
No, and it's little things like, okay, yeah, maybe you've increased how much you're drinking, but have you increased your salt intake so that you can absorb that water? Are you thinking about that?
Right.
Maybe you've got chronic fatigue syndrome like me. Are you taking a multivitamin to make sure that it is making a difference? Because
Yep.
multivitamins are one of the things that has been proven to make a difference to chronic fatigue syndrome, whereas 90% of other things don't work.
Yep.
Are you doing that research to be a participant in your own healthcare rather than just a passive patient being spoon fed how to look after yourself?
Right. Or thinking that it doesn't matter. I had a client who started doing B12 shots, and the difference in her cognitive capacity was so significant that she was able to show me where the difference was. And I was like, on her word count, and I was like, that, I mean, just the difference between like balancing your biology. I'm not saying everyone should do B12 shots, right? Like this is not medical advice. What I'm saying is basically what you just said, which is if you don't actively go after the things that are impairing your health sometimes, that alone could cause burnout because it's causing, again, the imbalance between your expectation of what you should be able to do and what you're able to do, and the imbalance between those two things is eventually going to cause burnout.